It was very interesting to watch Kasparov's return to chess playing in the Rapid tournament in St. Louis. This was an extremely difficult field for him to face, and basically everybody played enterprising, exciting chess and defended very stubbornly against him. So one of the most interesting games was the game that he played with White against Nepomniachtchi, where we'll just go right into the game here. The game was a Grunfeld, which Kasparov played a lot with Black in his career. He played knight f3, bishop g7, h4, which is a very rare line, showing that he's actually been following the current trends and fashions of this variation. And the threat is just to take and then go h5. So c6 was played, and Kasparov played bishop g5. You might wonder, what's the point of that? He would like to simply take and go queen b3, putting pressure against the d5 pawn. And then after taking, he plays e4, so he's built up a huge center and he's threatening to take the pawn. Now Black has the choice of playing b5 or bishop to e6. He opted for bishop e6, and Kasparov went straight ahead with e5. And you could almost definitely guarantee that Kasparov would play e5 because he's going to follow up with h5, and then he has the idea of h6, and the position's very awkward for Black to play. So Black played knight d7. It may have been better to simply take and then play knight d7, simply so White would not have a knight to put on the e4 square like he did in the game. You'll see what I mean, because in this position, the bishop is extremely passive on f8, and White just played knight e4. You might wonder, what's White threatening? He's threatening knight d6 check, which would immediately win the queen on d8 due to the pin. So here f6 was played, breaking the pin, and the bishop dropped back, and now White was simply threatening to take on c4. So b5 was played. Perhaps more solid may have just been simply bishop f5 and knight 7 b6. So b5 was played, Kasparov played a4, bishop f5, knight g3, attacking the bishop on f5. So here, White's able to obtain the bishop pair, and so he has the bishop pair, and when you have two bishops like this, the most important minor piece on the board is the unopposed bishop. And in this case, White would love to lengthen the diagonal of his light-squared bishop. So he simply took, and then he played bishop e2, and this was unnecessarily passive. Better was simply taking and then playing b3. And now Kasparov would have had a huge advantage because this pawn on b5 drops off with check, so the c4 pawn cannot move. And here Kasparov would have definitely had a clear advantage. So he played bishop e2, after which I think Black should just play a5 and bishop b4 and has quite a solid position. And after playing bishop e4, he has good chances of getting rid of White's bishop pair. So he played bishop e7, which was quite passive. Kasparov castled, a5 was played, and it makes sense. White has the threat of rook a5. So he plays a5, b3, and this was a great move by Kasparov because he had to anticipate what to do after c3, because he clearly can't move the bishop because then b4 will be played, creating a dangerous connected pass pawn or protected pass pawn on c3. So he played bishop takes b5. This was a great little tactical shot here because e6 is how he's winning back the piece due to the pin. So after castling, this was a tough choice. Does he take on d7 with the pawn or with the bishop? And presumably he did not take with the bishop because he was afraid of knight to b6 and then queen to d5, attacking b5 and e6. But here White can just play queen e2. And as long as he defends the e6 pawn, he has a crystal clear advantage. So unfortunately he captured this way, and after knight c3, he's forced to give up that pawn because he has to move the bishop out of the way. So check, king h8, queen takes d2, knight e4 was the intermediate move, key intermediate move, attacking the queen, and then he's just simply able to pick up the d7 pawn. So after queen takes d7, knight d2, here we have a position that's very close to equal. It's a little bit more comfortable to play with Black. White probably should have pushed his pawn up to d5 at some point in the near future. He played rook a2, he wanted to put his rook on the e-file, rook a e8, rook a e2, queen to f4, perhaps simply rook takes d8 and d5 would have been the best option here. Alright, he played g3 because he wanted to go king to g2, which was a reasonable choice here. And now Black played f4, which was a mistake. Probably Black should have simply taken and played rook d8 and been slightly better. f4 was played, and here Kasparov simply miscalculated. He played rook h1. Better was to simply take and then play bishop f7. Here he keeps an eye on the g6 pawn, so he can play simply rook to h1 next move, and then he'll be able to capture that pawn due to the pin. He tried to play the same idea through a different move order, but he fell for a very nasty trick. So he played rook takes e8, and here he probably should have just played queen f3 and played on down a pawn. But instead, he played bishop f7, thinking he was going to win the g6 pawn, and here Nepomniachtchi had a really strong move. The move was simply rook to e3. And after rook to e3, there was no way to stave off mate. After f takes e3, queen takes check, king f1, and f3. And here Kasparov resigned. There was the threat of mate on e1 and the threat of mate on g2, so there was nothing to do. So unfortunately, Kasparov played really aggressively. I mean, if you look at his opening moves, h4, bishop g5, e4, e5, h5, h6, knight e4, a4. I mean, almost every single move he made was moving forward and aggressive. He played a couple of slow moves. Bishop e2 was not the best. E takes d7 was undoubtedly a mistake. Had he simply played e takes f6 and b3 on move 17, and had he simply played bishop takes d7 on move 22, he may have had a very big advantage and won a relatively short game. So all credit to Nepomniachtchi. He played a great game, but it was very exciting to see one of the greatest players of all time playing very aggressive and exciting chess in his 50s, and it's great to see him back. So this was a really exciting game.